On the crisp morning of September 19th, 94, precisely at 7 hours and 42 minutes, Lieutenant Edwin Leiper found himself perched in the open turret of his M18 Hellcat, stationed on the strategic heights of Hill 246 near the village of Errour in France. As he gazed out across the battlefield, he focused intently on the dense, swirling fog enveloping the landscape. A fog thick enough that visibility barely extended to 30 feet in any given direction. Within this shroud of gray mist, a menacing silhouette of a German tank gun barrel slowly pushed forward, its dark muzzle emerging into the faint daylight. At that moment, the young officer, who was just over 26 years of age, had been in command of this particular tank destroyer platoon for approximately 3 months, during which he had yet to engage in combat against the formidable Panther tanks that had become notorious across the European theater. That very morning, the German 113th Panzer Brigade had unleashed a significant number of armored vehicles. 45 Panther tanks, accompanied by 36 Panzer Mark V tanks, advancing directly toward the command post of the United States 4th Armored Division. Within his small unit, Lieutenant Leiper commanded a squadron consisting of 4 M18 Hellcat tank destroyers, vehicles that, at the time, had earned a reputation among American tank crews for being the butt of countless jokes and derisive comments since their deployment in France 2 months earlier. These vehicles, known as Hellcats, had a modest weight of barely over 17 tons, making them comparatively lightweight in the vast, mechanized battlefield. In stark contrast, the approaching enemy Panther tanks tipped the scales at around 45 tons, more than double the weight, and represented a true behemoth of armored warfare. The armor protection of the M18 was minimal, only about 13 millimeters thick on the frontal armor, an amount barely sufficient to deter rifle bullets, let alone withstand a direct hit from a major tank cannon like that of the Panther. The formidable German tank's frontal armor, on the other hand, was a solid slab of approximately 80 millimeters of hardened steel, designed expressly to deflect or absorb the impact of Allied firepower. The parent unit of Lieutenant Leiper, the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, had been equipped with the first wartime production runs of the M18 Hellcat, starting in May of 1944, while still undergoing training in England. Captain Thomas Evans, commanding Company C within the battalion, had watched his men as they scrutinized these new, seemingly fragile machines with a mixture of cautious curiosity and concern. The armor protection of the Hellcat was considerably thinner than that of the M8 armored cars, and the open-top turret exposed the crew to the elements and potential enemy fire from above. A well-placed mortar shell, for instance, could obliterate the entire crew in a fraction of a second, striking through the open sky of the turret. Over the preceding 3 days of intense combat around Errour, the 4th Armored Division had suffered significant losses. The unit had been reduced by the destruction of approximately 14 Sherman medium tanks and 7 Stuart light tanks. These losses accounted for 25 soldiers killed and 88 wounded, most succumbing when German 75mm and 88mm guns penetrated their armor at distances exceeding 1,000 yards. Such German weaponry had proved devastatingly effective in knocking out Allied tanks from afar, especially considering the limitations of the M18's weaponry. Indeed, the M18's own main gun, a 76mm cannon, lacked the firepower to pierce the thick frontal armor of a Panther at any typical combat range. Tests conducted by the U.S. Army had conclusively demonstrated that hitting the Panther's front armor was virtually impossible for the Hellcat's gun, whether at 1,000 yards, 500 yards, or even at point-blank range. The only viable strategies for destroying a Panther with an M18 involved either targeting the lower gun mantlet and hoping the shell would deflect downward through the minimal 15-16 millimeters of armor protecting the driver's position, or maneuvering around the opponent to attack its more vulnerable sides or rear. But such tactics were perilous, often requiring close proximity or precise flank maneuvers that put the crew at great risk. Tank crews operating Sherman tanks openly referred to the M18 as a death trap, citing its vulnerability in a direct confrontation with German armor. Meanwhile, veteran crews from older battalions utilizing the M10 tank destroyers viewed the Hellcat as dangerously unreliable and ill-suited for frontline engagement, calling it simply a suicide machine because of its slender armor and open turret. Though the design specification for the Hellcat had aimed for impressive speeds, up to 55 miles per hour on paved roads, such velocity was essentially meaningless if the vehicle could be destroyed before it could fully leverage its mobility. The doctrine espoused by General Bruce was that battalions armed with M18 Hellcats should exploit weaknesses within German lines, maneuver swiftly into advantageous positions, deliver precise and accurate fire, and then retreat before the enemy could retaliate. This hit-and-run style of combat was hailed as brilliant in the staff meetings held at Fort Hood, Texas, where military strategists envisioned the tanks racing across the battlefield, striking rapidly and disappearing before the Germans could respond. However, in actual combat against German Panthers, whose crews had fought perseveringly for nearly 2 years on the Eastern Front, such tactics began to seem dangerously naive or even outright suicidal. The German 5th Panzer Army launched a major counteroffensive at dawn on that very day, September 19th. Adolf Hitler himself had issued orders for this attack, aiming to halt General George Patton's Third Army, recapture the strategic city of Nancy, and force the Allied forces to retreat back across the Moselle River. The German 111th and 113th Panzer Brigades had been supplied with a fresh batch of Panther tanks directly from the factory, making their assault especially menacing and formidable. In this critical moment, Lieutenant Leiper, situated on that fog-shrouded hill, was acutely aware of the stark disparity between the armor, firepower, and tactics of his American units and the ruthless efficiency of the German panzer forces bearing down upon them. The fog, the enormity of the approaching threat, and the inherent vulnerabilities of his vehicles all combined into a tense tableau that could determine the fate of his squad and possibly the larger battle unfolding around Arrow. In the vast and unforgiving landscape of the European theater of World War II, there existed a handful of tank models that, despite being relatively new or less experienced in combat, commanded an awe-inspiring reputation for their formidable presence and battlefield effectiveness. Among these was the Panther, a German tank that, even at the outset of its deployment, was widely regarded as one of the most intimidating vehicles of its kind. To the inexperienced eye, young and relatively unseasoned military crews, the term crews itself often implied a lack of extensive combat experience or tactical expertise. Yet, paradoxically, these units operating the Panther were feared throughout the European battlefield, their reputation built on the destructive capacity, resilience, and tactical prowess that they could demonstrate when unleashed in combat. To illustrate just how potent and decisive a small, well-coordinated team of tank destroyers can be against a much larger force, consider a specific historical instance where a mere 4 tank destroyers, commanded by a brave and skilled officer, succeeded in halting an entire Panzer German armored brigade. If you find value in stories of heroism and tactical ingenuity, the kind of accounts that reveal the ferocity and ingenuity of the soldiers on the ground, then it's worth taking a moment to reflect on this remarkable event, perhaps by showing a symbol of appreciation or admiration. Such stories serve as powerful reminders that even a handful of well-led units can significantly influence the outcome of larger battles, showcasing individual bravery and tactical mastery in the face of overwhelming odds. Now, let us shift our focus back to the officer known as Leiper, a figure whose critical actions on a crucial morning changed the course of that engagement. It was precisely 7:45 in the early morning hours when Leiper's 4 M18 tank destroyers reached the elevated position atop Hill 246. At that very time, Captain William Dwight, an important liaison officer attached to the 37th Tank Battalion, had already spotted the advancing German column approximately 15 minutes earlier while maneuvering along the road in his Jeep. Recognizing the threat, Dwight promptly raced back to Headquarters of Combat Command A to inform higher command of the enemy's approach. His urgent report prompted Colonel Bruce Clark to issue an immediate and decisive order. assemble one platoon of tank destroyers, move them quickly to the vantage point at Hill 246, and, most critically, stop the enemy before they could advance further or establish a stronger foothold in the area. As the four M18s dismounted from their transport vehicles and prepared for action, the first ominous sign of the approaching enemy appeared out of the fog that blanketed the battlefield. Out of the thick, swirling mist, a single German Panther emerged at the foot of the hill, less than 100 yards away from their position. The tank's long, powerful 75mm gun was swept to the left and right, scanning the terrain in search of targets. Yet the dense morning fog prevented it from detecting the American troops' exact location. Sergeant Stacy, commanding the lead M18, faced a harrowing split-second decision, about 15 seconds to be precise, during which he had to determine whether their presence was enough to halt the enemy or whether their small force was destined to be overwhelmed. This moment would ultimately test the very essence of the tank destroyer doctrine, a strategy predicated on speed, firepower, and tactical positioning. Stacy's machine was equipped with an advanced turret that could rotate fully in less than 20 seconds, a technological advantage that he possessed over the German Panthers turret, which required manual operation and took nearly a minute for a complete turn. The hum of the electric motor inside the M18's turret signaled the swift readiness of his crew. With a quick and decisive movement, the gunner acquired the target, a threat filling the visual scope of the M18. At this precise moment, the range was measured at about 75 yards, with the Panther's hull filling much of the sight picture. Yet the German crew remained unaware of their attacker's presence, hidden beneath the thick morning mist and fog. At exactly 7:46 and 15 seconds, Stacy gave the command to fire. The M18's 76mm gun roared to life, and within a fraction of a second, a shell shot forward, crossing the 75-yard distance in mere instants. The projectile struck the Panther's right track assembly with precision, shattering it instantaneously. The impact caused the tank to lurch violently, coming to a stop as smoke billowed out from the severely damaged suspension system. The German crew members promptly began evacuating the vehicle, realizing the dire threat they faced and knowing that another well-placed shot might be imminent. Without hesitation, Stacy's loader quickly rammed another round into the breech of the gun, only 7 seconds after the initial shot. The gunner, eager to capitalize on the moment, fired again, this time aiming for the Panther's thinner side armor. The second round penetrated the armor, igniting a destructive blaze within the tank's interior. Flames erupted fiercely, engulfing the German vehicle in a fiery inferno. The German commander, along with the gunner, managed to escape the burning wreck, but the driver and the radio operator, caught in the chaos, did not survive the blast. Moments later, a new threat appeared from the fog. Another Panther, this time emerging from the same general vicinity, roughly 30 seconds after the initial engagement. Its position was consistent, at the base of the hill and at a range of about 80 yards. The German crew had been alerted to the previous attack and were now scanning the mist, attempting to locate the American units they perceived as threats. Fog continued to restrict visibility, making it nearly impossible for the Germans to precisely target the American vehicles. Meanwhile, the low silhouette of the M18s made them difficult to spot from below, further complicating the German efforts to engage effectively. In a remarkable display of his crew's battlefield confidence and the inherent advantages of their technological equipment, Stacy's gunner swiftly fired without awaiting additional orders from the commander. The shell struck the second Panther's mantlet, a vital part of the tank's frontal armor, where the ricochet effect, as predicted by Army Ordnance specialists, played a decisive role. Instead of penetrating directly, the shell deflected downward through the relatively thin armor that protected the area above the driver's compartment. The impact caused the second tank to come to a halt even before it could retaliate. No flames, no smoke, just a dead machine with no signs of life inside it. The crew, defeated by the accurate and swift counterattack, remained inside, their fate sealed by a deadly combination of precise marksmanship and tactical positioning. This brief but intense engagement exemplifies how a small, well-coordinated group of highly trained soldiers, armed with modern and effective weaponry, can turn the tide in a battlefield dominated by larger forces and seemingly insurmountable odds. The quick thinking, technological advantage, and tactical discipline demonstrated here underscore the importance of preparation, agility, and courage, key factors that have often defined the outcomes of wartime confrontations. Despite their youth and relative inexperience, the crews operating these tank destroyers proved that with the right strategy and execution, even a handful of units could challenge and, in this case, neutralize a formidable enemy force. The four remaining M18 tank destroyers, under Leeper's command, had strategically positioned themselves across the crest of the hill, each at carefully calculated distances, spaced roughly 50 yards apart. This formation adhered strictly to conventional doctrines of tank destroyer tactics, which emphasized dispersion to minimize the risk of a coordinated enemy attack wiping out multiple vehicles at once. The purpose of such a layout was clear: never to bunch together, so that if one vehicle was hit, the others would remain operational and capable of supporting each other or launching a counterattack. On the far left flank, Sergeant Henry Hartman took command of the lead M18. He was a seasoned crewman, having served in a tank destroyer battalion since it was activated in April of 1941. Over the past 3 years, he had undergone extensive training and had seen only 2 months of combat. The fog around them was thick, making visibility extremely limited, concealing everything beyond 100 feet. Suddenly, from the dense white smoke that enveloped the battlefield, German tanks materialized, like apparitions emerging from the mist, seemingly unwelcome and unpredictable. They advanced in a tight column formation, each vehicle closely trailing the one ahead, an approach that made them less conspicuous but also limited their ability to see the American defenses. Unaware of the presence of Leeper's platoon, the German column inexorably moved forward into a trap. The first target emerged like a specter from the fog, a Panther tank, designated 747, inching down the slope. Hartman's gunner spotted it just in time, locking onto the approaching threat at approximately 90 yards. With a steady hand, the crew fired a single shot through the side armor. The shell found its mark, igniting the Panther into flames. The burning vehicle was engulfed rapidly, its crew helpless as they scrambled to abandon the sinking beast. Simultaneously, the fourth Panther, numbered 748, was engaging from the center position. Leeper's M18, lying in wait at his designated spot, fired twice in quick succession. The first shot missed high, but the second struck the turret ring, causing it to jam. The Panther's turret halted abruptly. Its crew, realizing the dire situation, abandoned the tank and fled into the encroaching fog. Within seconds, the German soldiers dissolved into the whiteness, disappearing from sight. A third Panther, number 749, now entered the scene. This was the same tank where Corporal Stacy had scored his second kill. The German crew had evidently spotted the flash of previous gunfire and had become alert to the threat. As a result, their long-range guns slowly began traversing towards Stacy's position, a crawl that felt agonizingly slow to the American crew. The German gunner, knowing he was close to death, felt each incremental movement as an eternity, an almost torturous experience. Stacy's gunner reacted promptly, firing the first shell, which struck the Panther's gun mantlet with a decisive penetration. The impact immediately stopped the tank's forward motion, rendering it immobile. The crew inside was trapped, unable to escape or respond, ultimately suffering total casualties, with all 5 men aboard lost in the relentless chaos of the fight. In just a measly 4 minutes, 5 German Panthers had been destroyed, each loss confirming the effectiveness of their defensive strategies and tactics. The entire success hinged not on the raw speed of the M18s, but rather on their ability to quickly traverse their turrets, their weapons, at a pace that was crucial in this fog-obscured terrain. The narrow engagement range, less than 100 yards, played directly into the M18's strengths. Its 67mm gun could accurately destroy the German tanks at close quarters, something the Panther's longer-range guns could not do in such obscure conditions. Despite the losses inflicted, the Germans remained undeterred. The 6th Panther, numbered 750, appeared at a distance of roughly 750 yards, more than enough to inflict damage, but the enemy had also adapted. Their crew had learned from the preceding encounters. This time, their commander had carefully positioned his tank with only the turret exposed, hiding the hull behind a small rise of earth, allowing only the turret to be visible. This maneuver offered a better shot at Stacy's M18, which was in position surrounding the hilltop. The Panther fired first the 75mm shell, striking Stacy's vehicle on the right side of its turret. The explosion was catastrophic, instantly killing the loader and causing shrapnel wounds to both the gunner and the commander. Fortunately, the driver and assistant driver were uninjured. However, damage to the right track severely hampered the M18's mobility. It was still able to crawl forward, but only with difficulty. Recognizing the peril, Stacy ordered his crew to retreat immediately. The driver carefully navigated the damaged tank down the reverse slope of Hill 246, heading back towards the command post at Arcourt, smoke curling behind them as German shells whistled dangerously close, yet narrowly missing. Their escape was perilous, but feasible, and they would manage to reach safety in the end. Meanwhile, Leeper's platoon was now down to 3 operational M18s from its original 4, as the loss of the damaged vehicle had left them undermanned against a formidable enemy. The German column, pressing forward relentlessly, showed no signs of pausing or breaking off their advance. Leeper found himself commanding what amounted to a vastly outnumbered force. 3 surviving tank destroyers against an enemy force that outnumbered him an astonishing 15 times. Nonetheless, he remained composed, trusting in the training, tactics, and the cover provided by the fog. The terrain and limited visibility had turned the battlefield into a deadly close-quarters arena, where the German tanks' longer-range guns held no advantage. Here, at these short ranges, under 100 yards, the speed at which the M18's turret could be rotated and its gun aimed became the decisive factor, overshadowing even the firepower advantage the German tanks possessed. The fog had effectively negated the Panther's superior range, forcing their engagement to happen in close proximity, precisely where the American tank destroyer excelled. As the battle raged on, at approximately 750 yards away, the next Panther appeared, the crew having learned from their earlier setbacks. The German commander, more cautious now, had carefully positioned his tank behind a small hillock, exposing only the turret. From this concealed position, he had a clear shot at Stacy's M18. The Panther fired first its 75mm shell, striking the right side of Stacy's turret, triggering a massive explosion that instantly killed the loader and wounded the gunner and commander with shrapnel. Fortunately, the driver and assistant driver remained unscathed. However, damage to the right track hampered the vehicle's mobility, leaving it barely able to inch forward. Stacy's quick decision was to order an immediate withdrawal. The crew maneuvered the damaged M18 down the slope, heading back towards their command post with smoke trailing behind, as German shells landed dangerously close but missed their target. The retreat was tense, but they were determined to reach safety before being overwhelmed. In the chaos and destruction of these frantic minutes, the fate of the various vehicles and crews was sealed. 5 German Panthers destroyed in less than 4 minutes. A remarkable testament to the effectiveness of the American tactics and the skill of the crews. Despite heavy losses, the resilient American force pressed on against a vastly superior German mechanized force, knowing that their survival depended critically on their speed, quick reflexes, and tactical ingenuity, especially in the limited visibility conditions that had nullified some of the Germans' advantages. On a bleak morning shrouded in thick, swirling fog, the German 113th Panzer Brigade launched its assault with a formidable contingent of armored vehicles. Their ranks initially included a total of 45 Panther tanks and 36 Panzer Mark V tanks, formidable machines designed to strike fear and command respect on the battlefield. However, within a mere span of 4 minutes, This force suffered a devastating loss. 5 of their Panthers were destroyed, their metal carcasses reduced to wreckage in the relentless fog. Despite this brutal attrition, a significant number of tanks, precisely 76, remained operational and were steadily advancing through the murky atmosphere, their silhouettes barely discernible against the white haze that blanketed the terrain. Amidst this foggy barrage of chaos, the 7th Panther, bearing the identification number 752, made its timid appearance on the battlefield. Hartmann's crew, manning their tank with steadfast precision, positioned their machine to engage from a position on the left flank, a strategic choice dictated by the terrain and the need for tactical advantage. As the enemy loomed closer, Hartmann's crew unleashed a single, well-aimed shot. The shell traveled swiftly through the mist, striking the engine deck of the approaching Panther with deadly accuracy. The armor in this rear section, being comparatively thinner than the frontal armor, proved no match for the penetrating shell. Almost instantaneously, flames erupted from the struck tank, billowing upwards like a towering inferno that reached dozens of feet into the crisp morning air, a dramatic and deadly display. The crew hurriedly evacuated, with 3 men managing to escape the burning wreckage, their faces etched with shock and urgency, while 2 others perished inside the inferno, their fates sealed by the flames. Just moments later, the 8th Panther, identified by the number 754, became the focus of a fierce engagement. It was targeted by Leaper's squadron, whose M18 Hellcat tank destroyer had taken a central position amid the chaos. The confrontation required 3 shots from Leaper's gun. The first shot aimed at the tank's track, hitting it squarely and causing a mechanical hiccup. The second shot, unfortunately, missed the mark entirely, skimming past into the misty surroundings. The third, however, found its target, a precise shot that penetrated the tank's turret, causing it to come to a halt. The crew, having survived this intense assault, quickly evacuated their vehicle, disappearing into the fog like fleeting shadows as their tank was left behind on the battlefield. Meanwhile, the German forces, realizing they were under attack, began to respond with increasing urgency. Communications between the various Panther commanders intensified, with frantic radio traffic exchanging orders, warnings, and signals across the battlefield. The engines of the battered tanks roared to life as they started maneuvering, attempting to reorient and counterattack. However, the thick fog rendered their efforts nearly useless. Visibility was severely restricted, preventing the tanks from seeing each other or detecting the locations of the American units. All they could see were brief, flickering muzzle flashes erupting from somewhere uphill amidst the swirling white mist, mere ghosts of enemy fire illuminating the obscured battlefield. Amid this tumult, Hartmann's 3rd confirmed kill was registered with the 9th Panther, bearing the number 756. The German tank attempted a tactical maneuver, trying to flank around the base of Hill 246, seeking a position from which they might turn the tide of the engagement. However, this movement exposed the tank's vulnerable side armor, a tactical mistake that Hartmann's gunner was quick to exploit. With precision, Hartmann's crew fired a single shell targeting the exposed side of the enemy tank. The projectile penetrated through the tank's sponson, a large, side-mounted armor extension, finding the ammunition storage within. The resulting explosion was catastrophic, causing the Panther to detonate violently. The turret was hurled upward with tremendous force, lifting approximately 3 feet off the hull as the entire vehicle was consumed by flames and shrapnel. There are no survivors from this fiery demise. Shortly after, the 10th Panther, identified by the number 758, found itself engaged in a deadly duel with Leaper's M18. The commander of this Panther was Sergeant Miller, a seasoned soldier with a crew who had trained together since their days at Camp Ibis in California, back in the year 1943. Their experience and coordination had proven invaluable in countless engagements. As the battle raged, the first shot from Miller's crew missed its target, as the Panther moved backwards, attempting to withdraw from the fight. Recognizing the threat, the German commander chose to retreat rather than risk destruction. In response, Miller's gunner fired again, this time aiming at the tank's mantlet, the armored shield protecting the gun. Unfortunately, the shot was deflected, bouncing harmlessly down through the glassy plate, the sloped armor at the front of the tank. The enemy Panther halted its retreat, and smoke began to pour from the driver's compartment, signaling internal damage. Despite the chaos, there was no open fire or explosion. The crew evacuated swiftly, 4 of them emerging from the tank's hatches, their faces streaked with dirt and sweat. The driver's hatch, however, remained stubbornly closed, leaving 1 crew member trapped inside. The exact time was 8 o'clock and 2 minutes when a German 113th Panzer Brigade, despite their efforts and fierce determination, attempted a coordinated and aggressive assault. 6 Panther tanks advanced simultaneously toward Hill 246, blindly pressing forward as the fog still obscured their vision. Their doctrine in such situations relied heavily on bold, aggressive tactics, charging into the enemy's formation, closing the distance quickly, and utilizing their superior armor to dominate. Such a strategy had historically worked effectively against Soviet T-34s on the Eastern Front, where a direct, close-range confrontation often tilted the battlefield in favor of the well-armored German tanks. However, this approach was utterly ineffective against American tank destroyers like the M18, which had no intention of engaging in fair fights. Instead, they relied on stealth, mobility, and precise shooting from a distance, catching their opponents off guard. As the German column pressed forward into the fog, the 3 M18s, manned by Hartmann, Leeper, and Miller, opened fire almost simultaneously. Hartmann's shot engaged the leftmost German Panther. Leeper's strike was aimed precisely at the center vehicle, and Miller's crew targeted the rightmost tank. In less than 10 seconds, these 3 shots had resulted in 3 distinct hits, and all 3 German Panthers came to a sudden, grinding halt, destroyed almost instantaneously. The remaining 3 tanks in the column, seeing their comrades fall, turned to retreat. One of them, however, lost its track in the chaos, forcing the crew to abandon it immediately. The other 2 tanks chose the retreat route, vanishing back into the impenetrable fog as if swallowed by the mist itself, leaving behind only the wreckage and the echoes of the engagement. In the chaos and confusion of this brief but intense assault, within less than a full minute, 60 seconds, at least 1, then 2, and eventually all 3 of those German Panthers had been annihilated in the blink of an eye, marking a decisive and overwhelming American victory in that fateful dawn. As the fierce engagement intensified, it became increasingly clear that the destructive toll on the combatants was reaching levels that resembled a true slaughter. The crews operating the M18 Hellcat tank destroyers were acutely aware that their fleeting advantage and their streak of good luck would not last indefinitely in this deadly dance of war. Every moment, every move might be their last, and the relentless pressure of the battlefield was unmistakable. It was precisely at 8 o'clock and 7 minutes in the morning when a German Panther tank managed to locate the position held by Miller's M18. This was no ordinary coincidence. The Panther had approached from an unexpected trajectory, coming uphill from the northeast, a direction that seemed to defy the typical terrain challenges the tank crews thought they understood. Shockingly, this German Predator had managed to ascend a ridge line that the American maps designated as impassable for tracked vehicles, a feat that demonstrated the Panther's excellent fieldcraft, skillful navigation, and the element of surprise. Such strategic maneuvering could easily have caught the Americans off guard, but in this case, their defenses were still relatively intact. The enemy tank's commander, displaying skill and tactical awareness, was quick to fire the first shot. The range was set at a mere 40 yards, an extremely close distance that could decide life or death in a split second. Without hesitation, the German gun aimed and fired, unleashing a 75mm shell aimed directly at the faintly armored front of Miller's M18. The armor on the front of the vehicle was only about 13mm thick, an extremely thin layer of steel designed primarily to deflect small arms fire, not to withstand direct hits from a formidable enemy tank. The shell struck precisely on this vulnerable area, penetrating the fragile armor with devastating effect. The impact was catastrophic. The shell pierced the crew compartment silently but deadly, leading to instant death for Miller, the tank commander. Alongside him, his gunners suffered the same fate, succumbing immediately to the destructive power of the round. The loader, though wounded, managed to stay alive, but the devastating blow had shattered the crew's unity and combat effectiveness. Meanwhile, the driver and assistant driver, who understood that their lives depended on swift action, managed to evacuate the vehicle through their forward hatches, escaping the deadly confines of the destroyed M18. The battlefield was now down to 2 remaining vehicles from their group, Leaper's and Hartmann's tanks. On the opposing side, German forces had already claimed a significant victory, destroying 13 of their Panther counterparts, though at a heavy cost, as the toll of tanks and lives was steadily mounting. Miller's service with the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion stretched over years, and at the age of 31, he was a seasoned veteran with personal ties rooted in Pennsylvania, where he had a wife and 2 children. Tragically, in the coming 3 weeks, a telegram would arrive, announcing his death and bringing devastating news to his family, forever altering their lives. At precisely 8:15, a change began to manifest on the battlefield. The first signs of the fog, which had been masking movement and providing a strategic advantage, started to lift. Visibility, initially limited to just about 30 feet, gradually increased, doubling to nearly 100 feet, and then extending to 200 feet. As the fog dispersed, the advantage shifted between the opposing forces. The German Panthers, benefiting from their armor's robustness and superior firepower, now had the capacity to clearly see targets at longer ranges, distances where their tanks' defensive qualities and gun effectiveness could truly shine. Meanwhile, the American M18s, heavily reliant on stealth, required to operate at very close quarters, utilizing the fog as a cloak for surprise attacks. A new threat arose at the 822nd mark when a 14th Panther appeared on the battlefield. Hartmann responded swiftly, engaging the enemy immediately from a distance of about 150 yards. Although this was considered a relatively long range for achieving a guaranteed kill, especially given the M18's lighter armor, the skill of Hartmann's gunner was unquestionable. Since joining the battalion, the gunner had consistently demonstrated expert proficiency in gunnery, passing every qualification with distinction. Their first shot struck the Panther's turret ring, a critical area that, when hit, caused the turret to jam. Consequently, the crew within the armored vehicle was forced to evacuate quickly before the tank became a vulnerable target. Later, at 8:23, another engagement unfolded as a German Panther opened fire from 300 yards on Leaper's M18. The shot missed the tank by a narrow margin, striking the ground only about 10 feet ahead of Leaper's position. The explosion of dirt and rocks propelled upward, showering the crew. Though the shrapnel from the blast did not penetrate the M18's thin armor, thanks to the vehicle's hardened steel and rapid evasive maneuvers, the message was unmistakable. The German shell's proximity emphasized the deadly precision of the enemy's firepower. Stay in one place and suffer the consequences. Reacting swiftly, Leaper ordered his driver to reposition their vehicle. The M18 executed a smooth reverse-down slope maneuver, then shifted about 50 yards to the left and finally returned to the crest of the hill in a new firing position. This entire movement was completed in approximately 40 seconds, exemplifying the vehicle's inherent mobility and the tactical doctrine of fire and scoot. The technique of quickly engaging the enemy and then swiftly retreating to avoid return fire. Such maneuvers were vital, as they prevented enemy gunners from establishing steady shots, capitalizing on the element of surprise, and avoiding becoming stationary targets for enemy tanks. The next significant development occurred at 8:28, when a 15th Panther was detected approaching from the northwest. Hartmann's crew spotted the German tank advancing through their binoculars, covering an estimated distance of about 200 yards. At this point, the fog had nearly dissipated, improving overall visibility to roughly 300 yards in most directions, revealing the battlefield's full scope. The German tank moved cautiously behind a low stone wall, only the turret and gun emerging above the cover, indicative of disciplined and calculated tactics. Hartmann's gunner quickly acquired the enemy target, locking onto the approaching Panther. Meanwhile, the German commander was diligently scanning the landscape with binoculars, searching for the American positions responsible for destroying multiple tanks within a span of just 43 minutes. The German crew demonstrated impressive discipline. They refrained from rushing their movements, avoiding unnecessary exposure to enemy fire and maintaining a cautious approach. Hartmann's first shot hit the stone wall directly in front of the Panther. The shell detonated on impact, showering the German vehicle with fragments of stone and debris. Although this initial fire caused no damage to the tank itself, it delivered an important message. The Germans now knew precisely where the American M18 was situated, as their turret began to slowly traverse in the direction of Hartmann's position, preparing to return fire precisely where they believed the threat was coming from. The process of manually turning a heavy, hand-cranked mechanism naturally imposed significant limitations on the speed at which the gun could be directed. In this case, the maximum traverse rate was probably no more than about 6 degrees per second. Meanwhile, Sergeant Hartmann, an experienced crew member, was actively engaged in maneuvering his loader ram, a critical component of the battlefield engagement, as he carefully reloaded the gun with another shell. This meticulous task took approximately 6 seconds, providing a brief window during which every moment counted. As the loader was working, the gunner skillfully adjusted the aim of the weapon, moving it slightly to the right by perhaps a couple of degrees and lowering the barrel by 1 degree, aligning the shot precisely on the target. This sequence of actions culminated in an instant judgment. Before the enemy tank's own gun could complete its own traverse and raise its gun sights to a firing position, the gunner fired the M18 Hellcat's cannon. The projectile, a high-velocity shell, swiftly struck the frontal armor of the German Panther's mantlet, which was designed to withstand direct hits, but was nonetheless vulnerable when hit in the right spot and at the right angle. This was a well-executed, textbook example of a deflection shot, a shot taken when a shell hits at an angle that causes it to ricochet or deflect, thereby nullifying some of the armor's protective advantage. Indeed, the round deflected downward with notable precision, penetrating the thin upper glassy plate of the Panther, a relatively light armor section at the front of the tank designed to provide some passive protection but vulnerable to skilled gunners. The shell's impact arrested the Panther's movement. The tank abruptly halted, ceasing to advance or respond in any way. Simultaneously, the turret, which could rotate rapidly but had now stopped, remained motionless, indicating that the shot was effective enough to disable the tank's offensive and defensive capabilities. There was no explosion, no secondary fire, only a dead vehicle, sitting immobilized on the battlefield, along with its crew, who had been rendered helpless by that precise shot. In that fierce engagement, a total of 15 German Panther tanks had been destroyed. Alongside these losses, 3 M18 Hellcat tank destroyers had been lost, with 2 crews killed and 1 crew wounded, who was subsequently evacuated for medical treatment. The entire combat action lasted for nearly 46 minutes, a period defined by intense firefights, tactical maneuvers, and the relentless pursuit of strategic objectives. Lieutenant Edwin Leiperer and Sergeant Henry Hartmann remained steadfast on hill number 246, each manning one of their remaining operational tank destroyers. At exactly 8 hours, 35 minutes, Colonel Clark issued a direct order to Lieutenant Leiperer: hold the position at all costs. This was crucial as the reinforcements were steadily advancing, remanning and strengthening their positions. Meanwhile, Company C of the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion was deploying additional M18s along the RGL line, reinforcing their defensive stance against the ongoing German assault. By this time, the momentum of the German attack, spearheaded by the notorious 113th Panzer Brigade, had significantly diminished. The offensive had lost its initial vigor, and the armored units began to withdraw towards Bzangele, a strategic fallback point. Their morning assault, which had initially threatened to break through American defenses, had clearly failed. The intervening fog, which had shrouded the battlefield, fully lifted by around 900 hours, revealing the full extent of the destruction wrought during the engagement. Visibility was now extended to over 1,000 yards, offering a clear view of the battlefield's grim tableau. Across the approaches leading to hill number 246, the scene was grim and chaotic. There were 15 destroyed Panthers sprawled across the terrain, their wrecked hulls and twisted turrets scattered haphazardly. Black columns of smoke billowed upward from burning tanks and fallen vehicles, filling the air with the stench of charred metal and fuel. Between the wreckage, the bodies of German soldiers lay strewn on the ground near several tanks, testaments to the fierce fighting that had taken place. Some crews had managed to evacuate their tanks, but had not escaped far enough before the ammunition stored within the vehicles ignited, causing deadly explosions and further destruction. At 9:15, Captain Thomas Evans arrived at Lieutenant Leiper's position. Evans, in command of Company C, had been a part of the 74th Tank Destroyer Battalion since their days at Campine, located in New York, back in the year 1942. He was a young man of 28, with a composed demeanor and extensive combat experience. Clad in his uniform, he carefully examined the wreckage of the destroyed Panthers through binoculars, taking meticulous note of each one. He counted carefully, confirming the kill counts twice to avoid any mistakes, concluding that his company had achieved a total of 15 confirmed kills against 4 remaining M18s. This victorious tally exceeded the expectations of even the most optimistic officers at Fort Hood, where initial intelligence assessments had predicted a much lower kill ratio for the American forces in this engagement. Evans, after confirming the numbers, turned to Sergeant Hartman and asked how many tanks his crew had managed to destroy. Hartman responded confidently that they had confirmed 6 Panthers knocked out during their engagement. Evans cross-verified these claims against observed wreckage positions on the battlefield. All 6 Panthers, located at key sectors within Hartman's firing zone, had been destroyed by well-placed flank shots or by shots deflecting off the mantlet at the front of the tanks. Such gunnery, Evans acknowledged, was textbook, precise, calculated, and effective. For his skill and bravery during that action, Hartman's gunner would later be awarded a Bronze Star Medal, recognizing his exceptional performance. Similarly, Lieutenant Leiper reported 2 confirmed kills, and his gunner added 3 more to that tally. However, one of those kills could not be verified with absolute certainty. The destroyed Panther's damage might have been caused by artillery fire or other battlefield chaos, which often complicates attribution amidst the confusion of combat. Recognizing the inherent chaos and the difficulty in perfectly attributing each destruction, Leiper accepted 2 confirmed kills for his crew, understanding that the fog of war often makes precise accounting impossible. Meanwhile, the German 113th Panzer Brigade, having sustained heavy losses, reorganized south of the town of Error. They had commenced the morning with a formidable total of 81 operational tanks, but by the time they withdrew, their strength had dwindled to 66 vehicles, a loss of 15 tanks in less than a single hour of fierce combat. The brigade's commanding officer reported back to the headquarters of the 5th Panzer Army that the effectiveness of the American tank destroyers, particularly the M18 Hellcats, exceeded their previous intelligence estimates. In particular, he advised that engaging these units without superior numbers and good visibility was exceptionally risky. The realization that the American tank destroyers had proved so effective was a significant tactical insight. The battalion, having demonstrated that the M18 Hellcat was not merely a hastily assembled or suicidal device, but a highly capable and deadly threat, had shifted the understanding of their battlefield roles dramatically. The morning's intense fighting had underscored the importance of cautious engagement. Unless German forces could leverage overwhelming numerical superiority and clear visibility conditions, they would be hard-pressed to succeed against the well-trained American crews and their swift, lethal vehicles. This engagement proved that the M18 Hellcat was not an expendable or ineffective weapon, but a force to be reckoned with, a realization that would shape German tactical decisions in the subsequent days of combat. The engagement on Hill 246 was far from being a mere trap designed to entice enemy forces into a deadly ambush. Instead, it epitomized exactly what General Bruce had envisioned when developing this particular tactical platform: a swift, deadly weapon capable of exploiting enemy vulnerabilities with precision and then retreating before the adversary could mount an effective counterattack. This was not a static fixture of warfare, but a dynamic, aggressive tool aimed at maximizing tactical advantage through speed, agility, and destructive capability. Yet, it is crucial to recognize that what transpired on September 19th represented only the opening chapter of a more protracted and intense engagement. The battle for Erfurt would extend for an additional 10 days, transforming into a grueling test of resilience, skill, and firepower. As the days progressed, the formidable German 5th Panzer Army would deploy reinforcements, including additional panzer brigades to bolster their defenses and offensive operations. Among these reinforcements was the 111th Panzer Brigade, whose arrival signified an escalation in the fierce confrontation. The assault grew increasingly relentless, featuring more Panther tanks and more aggressive strikes, each designed to break through Allied lines, or at the very least, to inflict significant damage. The 74th Tank Battalion's Company C found itself at the forefront of this intensified battle, prepared to face the overwhelming German forces with unwavering resolve. Throughout the span from the 19th to the 29th of September, this company engaged the heavily armored German tanks in no fewer than 17 separate combat scenarios, each a testament to their relentless determination and tactical skill. During these intense actions, the American crew demonstrated their proficiency by systematically destroying a total of 39 Panthers and several Panzer Mark IVs. Impressive numbers considering the formidable defenses of these German vehicles. Despite the ferocity of combat, the unit sustained losses as well. 4 of their M18 Hellcats were destroyed outright, and 3 more were damaged, yet their performance remained extraordinary relative to their losses. The kill-to-loss ratio retained its remarkable high value throughout the entirety of the battle, underscoring the effectiveness of the tactics, equipment, and training employed. As a result, the once-mocked M18 Hellcat ceased to be regarded with condescension by American tank crews. The vehicle's capabilities earned respect on the battlefield. Likewise, crews operating other tank destroyers like the M10 Battalion ceased viewing these machines as suicide devices, recognizing instead their value in combat. News of the Hellcat's performance rapidly spread through General Patton's Third Army, transforming perceptions and strategies alike. The reports confirmed what many had suspected but few believed: speed and agility, combined with precise tactics, could effectively counter even the most heavily armored German tanks. The Hellcat was not just a fast vehicle. It embodied a doctrine rooted in maneuverability and swift response, proving that agile tactics could neutralize the threat posed by more formidable armor. The success of the Hellcat and its operational doctrine reinforced the idea that if crews used these vehicles correctly, speed and tactical ingenuity could outweigh mere firepower and armor thickness. On that same afternoon, a young officer named Leeper returned to Company C's command post stationed in Erfurt. With meticulous care, he documented the entire engagement in a detailed after-action report that spanned 23 handwritten pages. Every fight was carefully timed, each shot was logged with precision, and estimates of range, penetration points, and crew performance were meticulously recorded. His report detailed every critical element of the combat, offering a comprehensive account of the operations. Within 48 hours, this meticulous document had reached the headquarters of the Third Army, where staff officers studied it intensively. They scrutinized Leeper's observations, recognizing the importance of his insights in refining and improving tank destroyer tactics and doctrine. Leeper himself was not destined to remain a mere lieutenant for long. His exemplary performance and the insights gained from such combat experiences would lead to a promotion to first lieutenant, which came by the early months of the following year, in March. His journey would take him across significant battles, from crossing the formidable Rhine River on March 24th to fighting through the rugged Harz Mountains during April. Throughout the remainder of the war, he would survive the relentless conflict, returning home to a nation that remained unaware of the crucial role he played, particularly during that foggy hillside in France in September of the year 1944. The M18 Hellcat had entered active combat service several months earlier, specifically in July of 1944, roughly 3 months before that pivotal engagement on Hill 246. The first production models of the M18 had been issued to the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion in May, even as the unit was still undergoing training in England. This battalion was essentially designated as the testing ground for the new design, test numbers 1, 2, and 3, where they could evaluate the vehicle's real-world capabilities, identify potential issues, and recommend modifications. They were often called the Guinea Pig Battalion because of their pioneering role in fighting with this innovative weapon under actual combat conditions. The M18 was a comparatively heavy vehicle, weighing about 17,700 pounds when fully loaded for battle. Its powertrain consisted of a single Continental R975C1 radial engine producing 400 horsepower, a substantial amount that significantly contributed to its impressive speed. This power-to-weight ratio, which came out to approximately 22 horsepower per ton, made the Hellcat exceptionally swift compared to other armored fighting vehicles of the same era. To provide perspective, the well-known Sherman medium tank managed roughly 13 horsepower for each ton of weight, a figure that underscored its comparatively slower pace. The Panther tank, a German formidable opponent known for its balance of firepower and mobility, managed just under 14 horsepower per ton. This stark difference in mobility was primarily due to the extraordinary speed capabilities of the Hellcat. In ideal conditions on paved roads, the M18 could reach maximum speeds of around 55 miles per hour. Realistically, under combat conditions, rough terrain and operational constraints would reduce its speed to about 40 miles per hour on solid ground, and perhaps only 20 miles per hour on particularly rugged or uneven terrain. Even at these diminished speeds, the Hellcat still outpaced virtually all other tracked armored vehicles engaged in the conflict. For comparison's sake, the Soviet T-34 tanks could manage speeds up to 34 miles per hour, German Panthers could reach approximately 29 miles per hour, and American Shermans topped out at about 25 miles per hour. In essence, speed was the primary defensive mechanism of the M18. Because its armor was comparatively light and incapable of stopping incoming projectiles, its ability to outrun threats was vital for survival and mission success. The armor protection of the Hellcat was minimal, mounting only around 13 millimeters on the hull front, barely half an inch of steel shielding, insufficient to withstand direct hits from enemy gunfire. Its primary strength lay in its speed and agility, enabling it to strike swiftly and then retreat before enemy fire could find its mark. This unique combination of rapid movement and offensive capability revolutionized the tactics of tank-destroyer combat, demonstrating that in the right hands and with proper coordination, speed could be a more effective shield than heavy armor. The armor on the turret, although slightly more substantial than other parts of the vehicle, measured only about 25 millimeters in thickness, equivalent to roughly 1 inch. To provide some context, the famed M8 Greyhound armored car, a relatively light reconnaissance vehicle, was equipped with just 19 millimeters of frontal armor. This comparison underscores how underprotected the M18 was, especially when set against even smaller scouting vehicles from other armies. In fact, the M18 tank destroyer's level of protection was somewhat inferior to that of many armored cars designed for reconnaissance and quick deployment. At the same time, reflecting on the destruction of the Panther tank that Hartmann managed at a distance of approximately 828 yards, it's notable that this particular Panther weighed around 99,000 pounds, an impressive and heavily armed behemoth, roughly 45 metric tons in weight. Its front glacis plate was built with a thickness of about 80 millimeters, sloped at an angle of 55 degrees. This design produced an effective armor thickness, when considering hits perpendicular to the surface, that was roughly 140 millimeters. In light of this robust frontal armor, the M18's standard armament, the 76mm gun, was simply incapable of penetrating such thick armor from any range when employing basic ammunition types. The United States Army had, however, developed specialized high-velocity armor-piercing rounds designated as T4 HVAP. These rounds incorporated a core made from tungsten carbide, which was ensconced within an aluminum shell. The purpose of this design was to boost the projectile's velocity, and as a result, muzzle velocity increased from approximately 2,600 feet per second to about 3,400 feet per second. In theory, these HVAP rounds could penetrate the Panther's thick mantlet armor at a distance of up to 1,000 yards, providing a much-needed advantage in firepower. Nonetheless, throughout the year of 1444, the availability of HVAP ammunition remained critically limited. Tungsten carbide, the key material in these specialized shells, was both rare and highly controlled, making its production difficult and restricted. Most tank destroyer units were issued only a handful, perhaps around 2, of these advanced rounds per vehicle each month, and crews were advised to conserve such ammunition for the most desperate situations, when conventional rounds would prove useless. Thus, during the pivotal engagement on Hill 246, the soldiers relied exclusively on standard 76mm armor-piercing rounds designated M62. Their tactical approach was straightforward and dictated by the glaring disparity in armor protection. Avoid engaging the Panther head-on. Instead, the soldiers knew that frontal assaults at long range were futile, given the armor's formidable resistance. The key to victory was to utilize maneuverability, achieving a quick, decisive position on the enemy's flank, or even better, from the rear. Tactical use of the environment played a crucial role. The fog, the terrain features, and any available cover had to be exploited to avoid direct confrontation with the Panther's formidable frontal armor. The reasoning was simple. Because the M18 lacked significant frontal protection, engaging head-on or at a distance in a sustained fire duel was setting oneself up for failure. Instead, under the cover of obscuration and terrain, they aimed to strike from angles where the Panther's armor was weaker. The strategic blueprint for this approach was born several years earlier, long before the United States officially entered World War II, when General Andrew Bruce designed a doctrine specifically tailored for tank destroyers. Back in 1441, before Pearl Harbor was attacked, Bruce anticipated that future warfare would be characterized by sudden, mass tank assaults, blistering blitzkrieg tactics, and armored columns punching rapidly through defensive lines, often with little warning. He believed that the answer to such threats was not to develop heavier or more heavily armored tanks that could withstand frontal hits, but rather to focus on speed, agility, and rapid response. Bruce envisioned a new type of armored vehicle, fast, capable of reaching speeds of up to 60 miles per hour, with firepower sufficient to destroy any enemy tank at 1,000 yards, and operated by crews trained to think and act aggressively. His doctrine emphasized the importance of discovering the enemy's position, striking decisively, and withdrawing before they could mount a counterattack. The emphasis was on mobility over static defense, never engaging in prolonged firefights, never fighting fair, and certainly never trading shots with heavily armored opponents from fixed positions. The realization of Bruce's visionary concepts manifested most notably in the form of the M18 Hellcat tank destroyer. This vehicle embodied all that Bruce had envisioned. It weighed only 17 short tons, could reach speeds of up to 55 miles per hour, and was armed with a 76mm gun. Its open-top turret provided the crew with exceptional visibility, giving them the situational awareness necessary for quick maneuvers and targeted strikes. An electric turret traverse system allowed the gun to rotate a full 360 degrees in approximately 20 seconds, enabling rapid adjustments during combat. However, despite its impressive speed and agility, the Hellcat faced a critical shortcoming that ultimately compromised its effectiveness against well-armored adversaries. The main gun, the 76mm M1, was in terms of firepower a mid-range weapon. It was the same armament deployed on later variants of the Sherman tank, firing identical ammunition with comparable penetration capabilities. When used against lighter tanks, such as the Panzer Mark V, the weapon was generally adequate. Yet in the face of the Panther or the Tiger tanks, its effectiveness was marginal at best. Against the thick frontal armor of a Panther, the 76mm gun was practically ineffective, unless, of course, the crew was fortunate enough to execute a perfectly calculated shot that deflected off the mantlet at just the right angle. Such shots, known as deflections, required precise geometry and expert knowledge of the target's armor and shell trajectory. Hartmann's platoon proved that such expert deflections were indeed possible. On September 19th, Hartmann himself successfully scored 3 kills through deflections, demonstrating that skilled crews could indeed overcome some of the gun's limitations by exploiting its geometry and the tank's weak points. His gunner was well-versed in the complex physics involved in striking at the right angle, understanding that with patience, precision, and a bit of luck, the 76mm gun could do what it was originally designed for, delivering effective fire against heavier armored targets when shot from the correct angle. These technical skills and tactical ingenuity became critical elements in the overall combat strategy that the crews of the M18 sought to implement in their engagements against the formidable German tanks. Understanding the precise point where a shell might ricochet off a target is a critical aspect of tank warfare, requiring a deep knowledge of ballistic trajectories and armor angles. Soldiers and tank crews learned to aim their weapons carefully, directing their fire towards the mantlet, the thick, armored front plate covering the gun's mounting, rather than wasting precious rounds on the more vulnerable glassy plate, which is the sloped armor at the front of the tank. By doing so, they could maximize their chances of a successful hit, especially when taking into account the complex physics involved in projectiles bouncing off armor surfaces. It was understood that when a shell struck at the correct angle, it would often deflect downward through the thinner upper glacis, allowing it to penetrate into the interior compartments, sometimes hitting the crew, leading to the destruction of the tank. This technique, born of necessity and refined through countless engagements, eventually became standard doctrine for crews operating the American M18 tank destroyers throughout the European theater of war. The key was clear: aim for the mantlet, avoid the unnecessary expenditure of rounds on less vulnerable parts, and exploit the geometry of armor and projectile physics to maximize efficacy. Effective combat required recognizing weak points and leveraging the existing armor design to one's advantage. It meant trusting in the physics of ricochets, knowing that a well-placed shot could deflect downward and find its way inside a tank's vulnerable areas. The German response to the American M18 was, predictably, based on their own tactical and technological advantages. They advised their crews to avoid close-range encounters where their guns would be less effective. Instead, they recommended maintaining a strategic distance to take full advantage of the superior gun range of their Panther tanks. The German Panthers' 75mm KWK 42L70 gun possessed the capacity to destroy an M18 at ranges up to 2,000 yards, a considerable advantage over the American tank destroyer, which, with its standard ammunition, could only effectively engage a Panther at less than 300 yards. This disparity meant that, at longer distances, the tactical situation heavily favored the Germans, who could strike from afar with relative safety and effectiveness. Conversely, in close-range combat under conditions of poor visibility, like thick fog, the advantage shifted to the Americans, particularly because of their rapid shooting and maneuvering capabilities, which could be exploited to catch the Germans off guard. Such ideal conditions materialized on the morning of September 19th, offering a rare but crucial opportunity for American tank destroyer doctrine to operate at its best. The fog was dense, visibility was limited to a mere 100 feet, and the element of surprise was on the American side. These factors effectively negated many of the Panthers' range and firepower advantages, allowing American crews to engage more effectively and inflict damage. Unfortunately, such conditions did not often recur, and the Battle of Arras continued for an additional 10 days following that initial engagement involving the tank destroyer named Leaper. During this ongoing struggle, The German 5th Panzer Army responded by reinforcing their forces, further strengthening their offensive potential. By September 22nd, the 111th Panzer Brigade had joined the battle, bringing fresh Panthers and new crews, all under the same strategic orders: to halt the advance of Patton's forces, recapture the key town of Nancy, and restore German control over the vital region. Throughout these critical days, Company C of the 74th Tank Destroyer Battalion saw action in every significant engagement. Their M18 Hellcats were everywhere on the battlefield, defending strategic positions such as Javali's, covering approaches to Lisi, and supporting the 37th Tank Battalion near Bzangala. The role of the Hellcats was driven by the vision of General Bruce, who envisioned fast, aggressive, and highly responsive maneuvering, an approach of fire, then quickly moved to avoid counterfire. This tactic proved effective on September 22nd, when, at 9:15 in the morning, a segment of the German 11th Panzer Division initiated an attack toward Javali's amid heavy fog, again reducing visibility to about 100 yards. From concealed positions, American Hellcats from Company B of the 7004th Battalion engaged the German column, managing to destroy 3 Panthers before the German units withdrew in disarray, without inflicting any losses on the Americans. As the morning fog lifted by the afternoon, the Germans renewed their efforts, bringing artillery into play and beginning to range their guns on known American positions. The German tanks, now better coordinated than during the earlier engagement of September 19th, advanced with improved tactics. They employed infantry screens to protect their movement, maintained better spacing between the tanks to reduce vulnerability, and avoided predictable approach routes that could be easily targeted. The American crews also adjusted their strategies. They started using nearby buildings as temporary cover, positioning their vehicles behind stone farmhouses with only their gun barrels exposed, so they could fire a shot and then quickly reverse out of danger, only to reposition in a different location before German return fire could be effective. These tactics relied heavily on the Hellcats' superior acceleration, which allowed the American tanks to outmaneuver their German counterparts easily, since no Panther turret traversal could match the quickness of the American vehicles' movements. By September 23rd, the weather cleared completely, providing clear visibility across the open terrain around Error, extending over 2,000 yards in all directions. With the diminished fog, the Panthers now held a distinct advantage because they could use their longer-range guns to engage M18 Hellcats at distances beyond the effective range of the American tank destroyers' weapons. Over the course of that day, several M18 vehicles were destroyed by the advancing German tanks. Yet, the American crews quickly learned how to adapt, refining their positioning tactics and exploiting the terrain and structures to their advantage, in an attempt to limit the German advantage in range and firepower. The ongoing battle exemplified how both sides continually refined their tactics in response to each other's strengths and vulnerabilities, underscoring the dynamic and evolving nature of armored warfare during this critical phase of the campaign. In the realm of combat strategy and battlefield tactics, one of the most crucial principles is to avoid unnecessary exposure to danger. Specifically, soldiers are advised never to reveal themselves openly in exposed, uncovered terrain where the enemy can easily target them. Engaging the enemy from a long distance is also fraught with risks and is generally not recommended unless there are strategic reasons to do so, because it often allows the enemy to maintain advantageous positions or call in support. Instead, seasoned fighters are trained to patiently wait for their opponent to approach or to identify routes of approach that are protected by natural or artificial cover. Such tactics enable the defender or attacker to maximize their advantages while minimizing vulnerabilities, making concealment and careful positioning essential components of effective engagement. On September 24th, Captain Evans experienced a critical and tragic setback when he lost his second M18 tank destroyer during a fierce encounter. The cause of this loss was heavy German artillery fire, a type of indirect fire that can hit targets beyond the line of sight. During this incident, a shell struck directly within the open turret of the tank, causing catastrophic damage. The impact was so devastating that it resulted in the immediate death of 3 crew members who were inside at the time. Despite the brutal nature of the attack, the loader of the vehicle survived the blast. However, he sustained terrible injuries, losing both of his legs in the process. A tragedy that underscored the brutal risks faced by those fighting in such machinery. Following his injury, the wounded crew member was swiftly evacuated to England, a move that was part of the broader effort to provide urgent medical care to wounded soldiers. Though he would never regain the ability to walk again because of his injuries, his resilience allowed him to survive the upheavals of the war. Remarkably, he managed to return home to Indiana in April of the year 1945, close to the war's end, carrying with him the scars of his sacrifice and service. As the campaign progressed, the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion made notable contributions to the battlefield efforts by successfully destroying their 25th Panther tank on the 25th of September. Their relentless determination continued as they went on to eliminate their 30th Panther on the 27th of September. Just 2 days later, on the 29th of September, they scored their 41st and final Panther kill. By that time, at the conclusion of the fighting, the unit known as Company C had proudly claimed a total of 22 confirmed enemy kills, a tally that stood as a testament to their effectiveness. The other 2 companies, A and B, each contributed further to this tally, accounting for the remaining 17 confirmed kills, thus bringing the total confirmed German tank kills by the battalion to 39. This relentless pressure compelled the German 5th Panzer Army to retreat across the battlefield by September 30th, marking a significant blow to enemy forces. In the aftermath of this retreat, the combat units suffered substantial losses. The 113th Panzer Brigade's operational tanks were reduced from an initial strength of 81 down to 47, illustrating the heavy toll of sustained combat. Similarly, the 111th Panzer Brigade had lost 19 Panthers and 12 Panzer Mark vs. vehicles that were vital to their armored capabilities, further diminishing their combat effectiveness. The offensive aimed at Nancy had ultimately failed in its entirety. Despite the setbacks, the forces led by General Patton's Third Army managed to hold their defensive line, effectively maintaining their positions against the retreating enemy. This steadfast stand kept the front stable, allowing the broader drive towards Germany to persist uninterrupted. Although the losses inflicted upon the American forces were significant, yet entirely within manageable limits, they did not hinder the overall strategic objectives. During these operations, the United States forces lost 14 medium-sized Sherman tanks, which were destroyed in combat, and an additional 7 light tanks of the Stuart model, also lost to enemy action. Moreover, 21 Sherman tanks suffered damage, but thanks to effective repair efforts, they remained serviceable and ready for future operations. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion experienced comparable casualties, with 4 of their M18 vehicles being destroyed and 3 damaged. The human cost was also notable. 21 soldiers were killed in action, while 37 others sustained wounds requiring medical attention. These numbers emphasize the fierce nature of the engagements, but also highlight the resilience and determination of the American units on the ground. Analyzing the kill ratios reveals just how successful the American tank destroyers were in these encounters. Their tally of enemy tanks destroyed, namely 39 German tanks, greatly outnumbered the 4 M18 tanks lost in action, creating an impressive ratio of nearly 10-1. No other armored American units operating within the European theater of war had achieved such an extraordinary record of enemy tank kills, solidifying the reputation of the M18 Hellcat as an exceptionally effective fighting machine. The M18 Hellcat proved its worth definitively during this period, earning widespread admiration among military personnel and analysts alike. Following the breakthrough at Aircourt, the demand for units equipped with a formidable M18 grew rapidly, as their effectiveness became more widely recognized. Many battalions operating with older M10 tank destroyers requested conversion to the newer M18 model to enhance their combat capabilities. This shift in preference underscored the increasing reliance on the Hellcat's superior speed and firepower. Initially, General Omar Bradley, who was in command of the First Army, had expressed reservations about deploying Hellcats widely, perhaps due to logistical concerns or strategic considerations. However, after witnessing the remarkable combat performance of the M18, Bradley reversed his stance. He recognized the significant advantage provided by the vehicle's speed and armament, and consequently, he ordered that M18 battalions be attached to every armored division under his command. Despite this, manufacturing capacity could not exactly meet the surging demand. Between July 1943 and October of the same year, Buick, the primary manufacturer of the M18, produced a total of 257 vehicles before production was halted altogether. The original plan had been to produce nearly 9,086 M18 tanks, but this extensive production goal was ultimately canceled due to resource constraints. Resources initially allocated for the M18 were reallocated towards the development of the M36 tank destroyer, which mounted a larger, 90mm gun capable of penetrating the frontal armor of a Panther at a distance of 1,000 yards. This new vehicle weighed 31 tons, slightly heavier and slower than the M18, making it less maneuverable on the battlefield. Nonetheless, the different armament and the firepower it delivered proved to be game-changing. The ability to destroy heavily armored German tanks, such as the Panther at longer ranges, was seen as more valuable than the slight edge and speed. Army planners prioritized killing ability over mobility, believing that the ability to eliminate enemy tanks at greater distances was a critical advantage. Many analysts agree with this perspective. However, veterans who fought at Aircourt and in similar battles would argue passionately that the M18 Hellcat was, in fact, the finest tank destroyer ever produced, combining speed, firepower, and reliability in a way that made it a true threat on the battlefield. Lieutenant Edwin Leeper continued to lead his platoon through the months of October and November, demonstrating steadfast leadership amidst the ongoing combat. During this period, Company C actively participated in the Lorraine campaign, supporting the relentless advance of the 4th Armored Division as it pushed toward the German border. Their missions took them into intense engagements with German armor near Duzay, near Finetron, and near Saarburg, where the fighting was fierce and the enemy's resistance stubborn. Throughout these battles, the M18 tanks consistently demonstrated their ability to outmaneuver and destroy Panthers, German heavy tanks known for their formidable armor and firepower. Time and again, the Hellcats proved that in warfare, speed and sophisticated tactics could triumph over the strongest heavy armor. The 7,004th Tank Destroyer Battalion's persistence and skill in these encounters reaffirmed their reputation. Their success showcased that swift, well-executed tactics combined with the right equipment could neutralize even the most heavily armored adversaries. This ongoing excellence on the battlefield kept the pressure on the German forces, gradually turning the tide in favor of the Allies as they advanced deeper into occupied territory. In the midst of the final month of the year, as winter descended in full force upon the European continent, a significant and decisive chapter of World War II unfolded in the dense, snow-laden forests of the Ardennes. This marked the arrival of December, a month forever etched in a history as the time when the Germans launched their last, desperate, large-scale offensive on the Western Front, a formidable operation that would test the resilience, ingenuity, and fighting spirit of the Allied forces to their utmost limits. With meticulous planning and the assembly of their strongest and most technologically advanced units, Hitler committed his final reserves to this daring assault, unleashing a formidable array of armored giants, including the formidable Panther tanks, the mighty Tiger tanks, and the infamous Tiger II, each a symbol of Nazi Germany's armored prowess. The confrontation, known historically as the Battle of the Bulge, was set to be a crucible where every American unit in the area would be put to the ultimate test. Among those tasked with defending the Allied lines was the critically important 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, a unit equipped with the swift and deadly M18 Hellcat tank destroyers, along with other versatile armored vehicles like the Edwin Leeper's platoon. This tense offensive was launched early on the morning of December 16th, in the year of 1944, when three concentrated German armies began their violent push through the dense, towering forests of the Ardennes. The assault involved 28 divisions, approximately 200,000 determined German soldiers, and a staggering number of 1,400 tanks and assault guns advancing in coordinated strikes. The Germans' bold and straightforward goal was clear and strategically significant: to divide and conquer the Allied forces by breaking through their defensive lines, ultimately aiming to seize the critical port city of Antwerp, a vital logistical hub. Their overarching objective was to destabilize the Allied front, which would, in turn, pave the way for renewed negotiations toward peace on Germany's terms in the Western territories. As the offensive raged, the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion found itself positioned close to the village of Saarburg when the attack commenced at precisely 2 o'clock in the early hours of December 17th. The order was swiftly delivered: immediate movement to the north at maximum possible speed to close the gap and prevent the Germans from exploiting their breakthrough. In response, the Third Army, under strategic command, rapidly redirected forces to counteract this unexpected breach, requiring the 704th Battalion to quickly redeploy to Bastogne, a pivotal town around which the German forces had already begun to tighten their noose. Company C of the battalion, traveling in a convoy of just 200 meters, took an extraordinary 36 hours to reach their new destination. Despite the slow progress, the unit's M18 Hellcat tank destroyers demonstrated remarkable speed and agility, averaging nearly 40 miles per hour on their approach march, a feat that indicated their readiness to respond efficiently to an enemy breakthrough. Finally arriving at Bastogne, they were able to apply their speed and maneuverability exactly where they were needed most, racing ahead to fill the gaps in the American defenses before the German reinforcements arrived or took full hold. This rapid response was a reaffirmation of the strategic doctrine championed by General Bruce, which emphasized the importance of swift, mobile tank destroyer units that could quickly reinforce threatened sectors and respond dynamically to enemy breakthroughs. The 704th's quick intervention at Bastogne proved instrumental in halting the German advance, and by December 19th, the battalion had established defensive positions in the town itself, which was already encircled and firmly held by the resilient soldiers of the 101st Airborne Division. The German forces, led by their panzer divisions equipped with feared Panthers and Tigers, pressed relentlessly from every conceivable direction, tightening their grip on the beleaguered town. Leeper's platoon, part of Combat Command B of the 10th Armored Division, played a crucial role in establishing and maintaining the defensive perimeter on Bastogne's northern approach. From their strategic vantage points, they faced constant probing attacks and small-scale assaults aimed at testing their strength and uncovering any weak spots in the American defenses. The German armor repeatedly attempted to penetrate these defenses, conducting regular, aggressive patrols and limited attacks to gauge the American resolve. Whenever German tanks ventured within range, Leeper's platoon responded with relentless accuracy, engaging the enemy with their M18 Hellcats, which were known for their speed and firepower. On the 22nd of December, the Germans launched a significant and aggressive assault in Leeper's sector, with a formation of 12 Panther tanks advancing across the snow-covered terrain in a coordinated attack. They started from a distance of 1,000 yards, a range initially thought too far for effective engagement. The American crews patiently allowed the enemy to close the distance, waiting until the Panthers approached within 600 yards, then 500 yards, and finally 400 yards, continuously evaluating their positions. When the Panthers reached a distance of 300 yards, Leeper's platoon opened fire with all 4 of their M18 Hellcats. In the first 30 seconds of firing, 12 shots were exchanged, and remarkably, 3 of the attacking Panthers were destroyed immediately, while 2 others were damaged enough to halt their advance. The remaining 7 Panthers, recognizing the danger, withdrew, retreating from the battlefield. This encounter underscored a crucial lesson learned earlier in the war at Ericourt: that closing with the deadly M18 Hellcats was a perilous mistake for German tanks. Yet, the Germans seemingly had not fully internalized this lesson, leading to their costly engagement. The fighting continued fiercely, and over the course of 37 days, from December 19th through January 25th, the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion amassed a formidable record, destroying a total of 41 German tanks during that period. Their enemies included a diverse array of German armored vehicles, from the feared Panther tanks and Tiger tanks to the Panzer V models, all engaging in relentless battles against American defenses. Throughout this arduous winter combat, the crews of the M18 Hellcats quickly adapted to the challenging conditions. They devised new tactics to navigate and fight effectively amidst the snow and ice, using snowdrifts as camouflage, positioning their vehicles behind frozen hedgerows, and taking advantage of the stark white landscape to conceal their movements. Visibility, a critical factor in these operations, ranged from excellent on clear days to nearly impossible during raging snowstorms, making each engagement a test of skill, patience, and adaptability. Their resilience and tactical ingenuity earned the entire battalion a distinguished unit citation, a formal recognition of their exceptional performance under extraordinarily difficult conditions and against forces that vastly outnumbered them. Throughout the Battle of the Bulge, the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion demonstrated extraordinary bravery, tactical flexibility, and an unwavering commitment to their mission, embodying the fighting spirit that helped turn the tide of this pivotal confrontation in the European theater of World War II. In the course of their relentless campaign, 21 brave soldiers from the 74th Tank Destroyer Battalion were honored with individual commendations for their extraordinary valor and skill during the fierce battles they faced. These distinctions included prestigious awards such as Silver Stars, Bronze Stars, and Purple Hearts, bestowed to recognize acts of exceptional courage, bravery in the face of danger, and injuries sustained while fulfilling their duty. Among these decorated heroes was Sergeant Henry Hartman, who distinguished himself so profoundly that he received a second Bronze Star for his remarkable achievement in combat, specifically for systematically destroying 4 German Tigers within a single engagement on January the 8th. His extraordinary skill and resolve exemplified the relentless determination exhibited by the battalion's men. Meanwhile, in March of 1945, a key figure in the battalion's leadership, Lieutenant Leeper, earned a well-deserved promotion to the rank of First Lieutenant. This advancement was not merely a change in title, but came accompanied by specific orders outlining his new responsibilities. He was tasked with assuming duties as the executive officer for Company C, becoming a vital part of the unit's command structure. Despite this new role, Captain Evans continued to supervise the company as its commanding officer. Leeper's new position entrusted him with coordinating essential logistical operations, managing the supply of ammunition, fueling vehicles, overseeing maintenance, and handling other support activities. These often overlooked tasks, though not as glamorous as direct combat, were crucial for maintaining the battalion's operational readiness and ensuring their vehicles and personnel could continue fighting effectively. On March the 24th, the 74th Tank Destroyer Battalion crossed the waters of the Rhine River, marking a significant movement in their campaign. Their goal was to bolster the advancing 4th Armored Division's relentless push into the heart of Germany. As they pressed forward into enemy territory, the nature of combat evolved. German resistance, once fierce and unyielding, was now collapsing under the relentless Allied pressure. Fuel shortages began to hamper the mobility of the German armored units, making it difficult for them to maneuver as freely as before. Additionally, shortages of ammunition meant that fewer Panther tanks participated in each engagement, disrupting German strategies and their ability to mount sustained resistance. It became increasingly clear to all involved that the Wehrmacht, the German armed forces, was in its final throes. The once powerful Wehrmacht was visibly dwindling and succumbing to the relentless tide of Allied advance. April brought the fiercest and most decisive battles of the campaign. The 74th Battalion fought through rugged, mountainous terrain, pressing into the regions near Gotha, where they faced remnants of German armored units. During these battles, they engaged and destroyed the last Panthers, the remnants of the once formidable German tank force. The enemy resistance consisted largely of desperate defensive stands mounted by units painfully aware that the war was lost but compelled to fight on due to strict military orders. The defenders fought stubbornly, knowing full well that their last efforts might be futile, yet motivated by discipline and duty to hold their ground for as long as possible. Finally, on the 8th of May, 1945, a date etched into history, the Germans surrendered unconditionally, bringing the European theater of World War II to an official close. The war in Europe, that had raged for nearly 11 months, concluded with peace restored across the continent. Throughout this entire period, the 74th Tank Destroyer Battalion had been actively engaged in combat for a total of 337 days, demonstrating extraordinary resilience and endurance. Over the course of their campaign, they successfully destroyed 98 German tanks, including Panthers, Tigers, and Panzer. These victories, however, came at a steep cost. 18 M18 tank destroyers were lost in combat, and the battalion suffered the loss of 63 brave men, while another 147 were wounded. Among those who survived was Lieutenant Edwin Leeper, who was just 27 years old when the war concluded. He had commanded a platoon of tank destroyers for 9 months, participating in significant battles at places such as Ericourt and Bastogne, and during the crossing of the Rhine River. Throughout this time, Lieutenant Leeper witnessed friends and comrades fall in combat, experienced the agony of writing letters to grieving families, and continued to fight because ultimately duty demanded perseverance. His service embodied the relentless spirit of those who knew that the path they tread was perilous, yet they pressed on because their cause was just. When the war finally ended, Leeper returned to the United States in August of the same year. The following month, he was officially discharged from active duty, taking the first steps toward returning to civilian life. Upon his return, he resumed a normal life. He found employment, married, and started a family. He lived a life of relative stability and peace, though the memories of his service, the sacrifices made by himself and by others like Sergeant Miller and the loader, who had lost their legs, remained etched in his mind forever. These sacrifices underscored the price paid for victory and the high cost of freedom. The M18 Hellcat tank destroyer served with the United States Army until 1957, demonstrating remarkable durability and versatility. It participated in the Korean War and was eventually exported to allied nations around the world. Yugoslavia, for instance, utilized M18 Hellcats well into the 1990s, long after the conflict in Korea. Nevertheless, the most celebrated moments in the history of the Hellcat occurred during the Ericourt campaign, specifically on September the 19th, 1944. On that day, a mere 4 tank destroyers faced an entire Panzer Brigade, resulting in the destruction of 15 Panther tanks in a single morning. This extraordinary achievement proved unequivocally that the Hellcat was not merely a light vehicle, but a formidable weapon capable of defeating heavily armored German tanks through superior tactics, strategic maneuvering, and well-trained crews. The Battle of Ericourt remains etched in military history as one of the largest and most significant tank battles fought on the Western Front during World War II. The 4th Armored Division claimed to have destroyed a total of 281 German tanks throughout the entire Lorraine campaign. Among these victories, the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion was responsible for 39 of those tank kills, further highlighting their effectiveness. The M18 Hellcat demonstrated that speed and agility, paired with superior tactics and well-trained crews, could overcome more heavily armored enemies, showcasing the importance of adaptability in armored warfare. This battle has become a point of study and admiration among military historians and strategists worldwide, who analyze it at staff colleges and military institutions. Its significance lies in the timeless principles it exemplifies: that terrain, weather conditions, and visibility can profoundly influence the outcome of battles, and that understanding and leveraging these factors can turn the tide of warfare. These lessons remain relevant today and continue to inform modern military doctrine and strategy. In the vast and brutal theater of World War II, few stories highlight the significance of ingenuity, tactical ingenuity, and precise execution as vividly as the tale of the 74-ton tank destroyer known as the M18 Hellcat. This formidable vehicle, despite its relatively modest dimensions and weight compared to some of the larger tanks, achieved remarkable success against the Germans, most notably in its ability to eliminate enemy Panther tanks, vehicles that weighed approximately 45 tons and were among the most feared German armored adversaries on the battlefield. The victory did not stem from the superior armor or firepower of the M18 alone, but was largely the result of the clever and disciplined approaches undertaken by the crews under the command of Lieutenant Leeper. These skilled soldiers harnessed the natural advantages offered by fog and the terrain, transforming what could have been a disadvantage into a strategic advantage that negated the Germans' technological and tactical edge. Such victories informed a broader military doctrine, one that later came to be viewed as largely obsolete. Following World War II, the United States Army reevaluated its armored forces and decided that dedicated tank destroyer battalions had outlived their usefulness in modern combat. Their specialized role, seeking out and destroying enemy tanks, was considered less relevant as tanks themselves evolved to become more versatile, and as combined arms tactics grew more sophisticated. Military strategists at the time believed that future conflicts would see tanks undertaking these anti-tank roles directly, rendering specialized tank destroyers like the M18 unnecessary. Consequently, by the year 1946, the doctrine advised and officially marked the end of the use of dedicated tank destroyer units, including the famous 704th Battalion. The soldiers who had fought valiantly, however, knew that the truth was more complex. They understood that vehicles designed for specific purposes, when paired with crews who received specialized training, could achieve results that more general-purpose tanks and armored vehicles could not deliver. The role of the M18 Hellcat was singular. It was tailored from design to deployment for one primary mission: to destroy enemy tanks. By that measure, it proved itself to be unparalleled among American armored vehicles, earning a distinguished reputation that endured well beyond the war's end. Its effectiveness in combat was quantified by remarkable kill-to-loss ratios, which testified to its lethal precision. At the Battle of Rewrote in France, the M18 achieved a kill-to-loss ratio of 10-1, a statistic that underscored its dominance. Across the entire European theater, this ratio settled at roughly 5-1, illustrating the consistent battlefield effectiveness of the Hellcat. The soldiers of the 74th Tank Destroyer Battalion, having completed their wartime duties, saw their unit deactivated in the year 1945. With the cessation of hostilities, these brave men returned home, carrying with them a mixture of relief, pride, and the weight of memories. Many of the M18 vehicles that had once roamed the European battlegrounds were either scrapped as war debris or distributed to Allied nations as part of post-war aid and reparations. A select few, however, survived the passage of time, preserved for future generations. Some found their way into museums, where they were carefully restored by passionate collectors who recognized their historical significance. Today, visitors can witness operational M18 Hellcats at the American Armor Foundation, where these storied vehicles continue to serve as tangible links to a pivotal chapter in armored warfare history. In addition to American collections, historical monuments and memorials stand as enduring testaments to the sacrifices of the soldiers who fought in a distant French town called Rewrote. Near this site, a commemorative stone monument was constructed by the local community as a gesture of remembrance and gratitude for the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion's courageous service, especially those who fought on September 19th and the days surrounding that pivotal moment. Situated near the strategic hill 246, the memorial marks the exact location of the fierce engagement where Lieutenant Leeper's platoon played a critical role in repelling enemy advances. The French residents have diligently maintained this monument over the years, recognizing and honoring the profound impact that American soldiers made in defending their homeland, acknowledging the devastating toll the battle exacted from both sides. Among the soldiers who participated in that historic conflict, Captain Thomas Evans survived and eventually returned to his native Pennsylvania. His service at Aricourt was a defining part of his life, yet he rarely discussed his wartime experiences in detail. When he occasionally attended reunions of the 74th Battalion, it was mostly to remember comrades and reflect on days long gone. Captain Evans passed away in the year 2004. At the venerable age of our Lord, we could record as 87. His obituary noted his command of Company C during the battle in France, but did not specify the remarkable number of Panthers, precisely 39, that his unit had destroyed during the operation, silent testimony to the intense and effective combat they engaged in. Likewise, Sergeant Henry Hartman, another survivor of those harrowing days, returned to the United States and settled in New Jersey. He pursued a career as a machinist, a profession he dedicated himself to for an impressive 37 years. Hartman was steadfast in his memory. He attended every reunion of the 74th until his death in the year 1998. He never forgot the significance of the 6 Panthers his unit had knocked out on that decisive September day, nor the crew members who fell alongside him in the brutal fighting. Their sacrifices left an indelible mark on his memory and symbolized the brotherhood forged amid the chaos of war. The post-war life of Lieutenant Edwin Leeper remains only partially documented, shrouded in a certain measure of mystery. Official records indicate that after the conflict, he returned to civilian life in the year immediately following 1945. Photographs from the period show a young man of 27, wearing the insignia of a first lieutenant, standing among his fellow officers at an interrogation point in Olli-Furfeld, Germany. In this picture, Leeper appears third from the left, an image capturing a moment of camaraderie and trust among men who had fought side by side, their future uncertain. Beyond this, what path Leeper took after the war is less clear, and no public records reveal where he settled or the profession he embraced. It is possible that he valued his privacy, choosing to slip quietly back into civilian life, much like many combat veterans who preferred to leave their wartime memories behind and forge new paths away from the limelight. What is indisputable, however, is the remarkable transformation of the M18 Hellcat's reputation in the years following the war. Initially, the armored personnel, often mocked or underestimated by tank crews who saw it as a specialized and perhaps awkward device, underwent a profound change in perception. By the time the year 2005 arrived, the very machine that tankers had dismissed as marginal and limited in July had become one of the most sought-after and respected vehicles in the armored community, with requests for its deployment mounting rapidly. The key to its renewed esteem lay in the effectiveness of its tactics, the speeds it could attain, the precision of its gunfire, and the tactical doctrines that emerged during the conflict's evolution. These factors proved that even a seemingly unconventional approach could yield extraordinary results. The initial skepticism was eradicated by evidence of the Hellcat's performance, which validated the strategic concepts that had once been deemed radical or even insane by critics. In essence, the narrative of the M18 Hellcat exemplifies how innovation and perseverance, combined with detailed training and disciplined execution, can revolutionize military tactics and change perceptions. The vehicle, once a subject of doubt and derision, ultimately earned its place among the most respected symbols of American armored warfare, proving that under the right circumstances, speed, precision, and tactical ingenuity could indeed triumph over adversities that seemed insurmountable at the outset. Imagine a scenario where a mere 17 tons of weaponry could have been capable of bringing down a much larger force, specifically 45 tons, if only the soldiers operating that armor had been adequately trained and if the battlefield conditions had aligned favorably. Such is the enduring lesson gleaned from the historic Battle of Hill 246. The core realization remains straightforward yet profound. Possessing state-of-the-art equipment or the most advanced machinery on the battlefield doesn't necessarily translate to guaranteed victory. In essence, tactical prowess, strategic use of terrain, and the capacity to adapt to ever-changing circumstances often weigh more heavily than mere brute force or technological superiority. Take, for example, the formidable Panther tank, widely regarded by many military historians as possibly the finest medium tank deployed during the Second World War. This armored marvel boasted a combination of formidable qualities. It was heavily armored, equipped with a powerful gun, and offered remarkable mobility relative to its size and weight class. Despite these outstanding features, the historical record tells us that, on a particular French hillside, the loss of 15 Panthers was achieved not by facing insurmountable odds or overwhelming enemy firepower, but because the opposing American crews employed smarter tactics. These American soldiers exploited the terrain to their advantage, used the natural features of the landscape to conceal their movements, and adapted to battlefield conditions with resourcefulness and strategic finesse. Their approach underscored the vital truth that clever tactics and terrain mastery can often turn the tide of battle in favor of a smaller or seemingly less potent force. If this narrative resonates with you, the way it did with us, then I'd like to ask you for a favor. Consider engaging with this story by acknowledging it in some way, perhaps by clicking a like button if you're viewing this content online. Every single acknowledgement, every show of appreciation through a like, signals algorithms that this story matters and that it should be shared with a broader audience. Such small acts of support help ensure that these significant but often overlooked historical lessons reach more curious minds. It's also worthwhile to take a moment to reflect on the importance of discovery and remembrance. By engaging actively, you contribute to a community dedicated to uncovering stories from dusty archives. We dedicate ourselves daily to rescuing these forgotten tales, stories that include brave tank destroyer crews who, through speed, clever tactics, and quick thinking, managed to save lives and turn the tide of combat. These are real stories about real people, men whose heroism often took place in moments of chaos and danger, acts of courage that deserve to be remembered and honored. As you watch, I invite you to leave a comment below, sharing the place where you're viewing this content. Are you tuning in from the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, or perhaps from another corner of the world? Our community spans the entire globe, and you're not just a passive viewer. You are an essential part of a collective effort to keep these memories alive, to ensure that the sacrifices and heroism of these soldiers are not lost to history. Feel free to tell us if someone in your family served in one of the armed forces or participated in such historic moments. Just by doing so, you help keep the spirit of remembrance alive and honor the legacy of those who fought and sacrificed before us. Your participation makes a difference, and your voice contributes to a broader movement to preserve these stories for future generations. We thank you sincerely for watching, for engaging, and for helping to ensure that figures like Edwin Leeper and units, such as the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, are preserved in collective memory. Their sacrifices, their bravery, and their contributions deserve recognition, and thanks to your support, their stories will not fade into silence.